Okay, we're now live, Chair.
Okay, good morning everybody then, and welcome to this meeting of the Flood Recovery and Resilience Programme Board. Can I ask Sophie, first of all, have we any substitutes and apologies?
We've received apologies from Councillor Baines, no substitutes.
Thank you.
Chair, with your permission, could we also record apologies from Neil Fernley?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Stephen, and send him our best wishes. I understand he's unwell. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, it's Sheila. I'm having real problems with Zoom this morning. Can I just give apologies from Robin Tuddenham as well?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. It seems to be a day for dodgy internet, so whether that's to do with the date, I had an earlier meeting where we suddenly all froze in the middle. Okay, so item 2, to remind members to declare any interests they may have. Item 3, admission of the public. There are no confidential items on this. Sorry, perhaps I should have also said under apologies, perhaps just to note, I may have to step out of the meeting for a short while at some point, and if so, I've asked Councillor Scullion to pick up the chairing should that happen. Item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of December, which hopefully people got access to through the link and previously seen. So can I just check if anybody's got any points of accuracy on any of those? Okay, in that case, we're happy to agree those as a correct record. Thank you. And so that takes us on to the next item, which is the presentation by the Calder and Colne Rivers Trust. And I think, so is this Andy to present this? Yes, so I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just get my slideshow going. If I could share my screen, is that possible?
Yes, should be fine.
Great. Hi all, thanks for inviting me to speak today. Just to give a little introduction to myself, I'm Andy Bray. I'm the Catchment Development Manager at the Calder and Colne Rivers Trust. We call ourselves the Calder Rivers Trust because it's less of a mouthful. But we work across Calderdale, Kirklees and Wakefield, trying to work in partnership with multiple organisations to protect and improve the rivers and waterways of those areas. One thing that I think is worthwhile me saying at the beginning of this presentation is that when we're trying to protect and improve rivers, we very much view the river as not just the water that's at the bottom of the valley that's flowing through the channel, but the river it's the integration of everything that happens across the landscape. So it's all of the area that then drains into the river that flows down through Calderdale, Kirklees, down into Wakefield and out into the Aire and then the Humber estuary. So we are a Rivers Trust. We are part of the National Rivers Trust movement. The map of the different Rivers Trusts you can see there on the left-hand side. We're a small grey, almost triangle just south of Leeds. You'll be familiar with the geography. And today I'm not going to talk about the kind of on-the-ground day-to-day stuff that we do in terms of river habitat improvements and farm and rural liaison work, farm engagement work, but I'm going to be talking more about our role as host of the Calder Catchment Partnership and where I think the Rivers Trust and the Catchment Partnership can really add value to the Flood Recovery and Resilience Programme of Calderdale. So if you're not familiar, Catchment Partnerships are a DEFRA initiative that was set up in 2013, and they follow what's called the catchment-based approach. This is a method of building partnerships across the catchment with multiple stakeholders, so that's local authorities, government bodies, water companies, environmental charities, other NGOs, and community groups. And what they do is they use data and evidence to develop a plan for the catchment, an integrated catchment plan, a management plan, that then they can start making interventions and working collaboratively to progress improvements across the catchment. And then through that, measure outcomes and adjust how they're delivering against that catchment management plan, that integrated plan. So improving the plan constantly as going along. So as I said, we host the Calder Catchment Partnership, and this covers the area that you can see in the map here. Calderdale, you'll be familiar, is in the top left-hand corner of this map that we've got in the black outline. Or sorry, I should say northwest rather than top left. But yeah, as I said, we work across this whole area. It's around about 1,000 square kilometres, and we work in partnership with local authorities, the Environment Agency, Natural England, and other organisations such as Yorkshire Water, the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and smaller community-based organisations and charities as well. And one of the key things that we have as part of that catchment partnership is the Calder Catchment Management Plan, which is split into 5 themes of activity, really, all around water management. So that's both in terms of water volume and water quality. So making sure we're doing stuff that addresses flooding and drought, but also the quality of water that flows through our rivers. Linked to that quite heavily is our work around improving, identifying and improving habitats and species, and connecting habitats and species across the environment as well to make things more resilient. And then there's the more social elements of the work that we are doing, which is around encouraging use of rivers and landscapes for recreation and leisure, integrating thought about the landscape and rivers in particular into planning and regeneration, both at individual planning application level, but also things like local plans and town plans, etc. And then finally, working with organisations to drive forward education and engagement. So education about the river and the wider natural environment, the connectivity of all of our activities and how that impacts the environment, and trying to encourage our communities to reconnect with our river. Particularly, I think it's particularly important in Calderdale, where the local authority's name comes from the river. The valley is named after the river, but in many respects, the river has been, well, we've had a difficult relationship with the river. We've been unkind in the past to the river, in terms of the things that we have thrown into it, pollution-wise, and continue to. But also the river. We've also restricted the river and where the river can flow, and that is one of the main topics of the flood recovery and resilience programme. In that the river is now biting back and trying to, it's not trying to, but it is. It's overcoming those barriers that we've put in place, and we're trying to mitigate against those risks that are there now in terms of flood risk, and trying to make our communities more resilient and able to recover quicker. So I just wanted to kind of run through some of the areas that we're working in and how I think we can be of real value as real partners within the flood recovery and resilience programme, rather than external stakeholders, which is what we are at the moment. So if we're talking at the local authority level, I'll focus first on flood resilience and recovery. There are a number of things that we're doing, both as the trust and as the host of the Catchment Partnership, around ensuring that we are engaging with landowners. We're looking for opportunities for natural flood management. We're thinking about opportunities for biodiversity net gain and improvements to our river and landscape environments, for both biodiversity net gain aspirations that the Environment Agency has through their flood resilience programme, but also through mitigating against the impact of working in rivers. But another element of this is around ensuring that we have good quality blue-green space, and we still maintain access to that blue-green space. Mythenroyd has been in the news a lot recently for being a really successful flood alleviation scheme. But one of the implications of that work is that actually the river corridor through Mythenroyd is no longer a natural environment that people can access and enjoy. And actually, if you're through Mythenroyd, it's very difficult to experience that river space, and that's something that I think there's some opportunity for better integrated planning on environmental improvements and flood resilience for future flood alleviation schemes that are coming down the line. But as part of this as well, Calderdale and lots of other local authorities have declared climate emergencies, and there are elements of the climate emergency which link directly to flood resilience and recovery, and also that link directly to other things that have come through from the Environment Bill from last year. And so some of the stuff that we're working on across the landscape and that we're trying to drive forward is around storing carbon in our landscape, whether that's through peat restoration from reseeding sphagnum moss on our uplands, whether that's through working with landowners to think about changes to land management practices, working with farmers to ensure that their farm businesses are resilient to both climatic change and that they are managing their land in a way that is mitigating against those climatic changes and forces that are going to be coming and that we're experiencing already, and we're going to be experiencing more in the future. And part of that is around making our landscape more resilient, both in terms of water quality and volume, but the habitats that are present across our landscape and expanding those. And another element of it is in helping people to understand the environment and understand how land management, how land use, how interaction with the environment impacts on our ability to mitigate against and to live with the climate emergency that we are amongst at the moment. I mentioned about the Environment Bill, and one of the major things that's come out of that is around legislation on biodiversity, and that comes through in terms of local nature recovery. And at the moment, West Yorkshire Combined Authority are coming up with local nature recovery strategies that they're going to be holding, but local authorities individually are going to be responsible for delivering those. And there is a lot of work that's already gone into the catchment management plan of the Calder to look at opportunities that align really well with local nature recovery and biodiversity net gain, both in terms of landscape scale stuff, area stuff, and also the linear features of that. So how rivers respond and how rivers can be incorporated into both those things. We've also done a lot of work on habitat networks and thinking about how we can better connect these. But also I mentioned earlier about quality blue-green space and how we can be improving blue-green space, both in the rural environment, but in particular in our urban environments, which is really difficult to access. You look at Hebble Brook as it runs through Halifax, and most of that is underground or behind or below 3 or 4 meter walls and is almost entirely inaccessible to the community that lives around it. It's also of really poor quality as well. Biodiversity wise, it's almost barren. And so there are small things that we can do in urban spaces which will have huge impacts when it comes to the quality of blue-green spaces. And an element that runs through all of this is around placemaking, which is around improving the quality of nature and our access to nature, but also how nature fits into our communities and how our communities work around nature and work with nature and benefit from nature as well. And so that's about the blue-green space as well. But also it's about how we can use nature for flood resilience, and that's stuff to do with natural flood management. That's to do with sustainable urban drainage systems and ways in which we can renaturalize our heavily modified and heavily urban environment to better act as a spongy environment for water to mitigate against flood resilience, but also making sure that we're maintaining that that quality and the what's the word that I'm looking for? That value that we have in the environment of Calderdale. Calderdale is a place that people come to visit because it's beautiful. The rural spaces are fantastic. We've got some incredible natural heritage, but we've got some incredible built heritage as well through what's left over from the Industrial Revolution and since. And it's about this element is around making sure that we are integrating both those natural heritage and built heritage components of our plans around development and landscape recovery as well. And finally, it's about improving well-being. There's many studies out, and you'll probably be aware of anecdotal evidence, but also you'll experience things yourself around the benefits of nature to societal well-being and individual well-being. And so things that I'm mentioning here around ensuring that we've got quality blue-green space in our urban environments, helping people to understand the environment and its benefits to both personal well-being, societal well-being, and community resilience, and also the benefits of improving and expanding on blue-green space to make improvements to air and water quality. And I think these 5 themes that I've talked about in terms of flood resilience and recovery, climate emergency, biodiversity, placemaking, and well-being these are themes that cut across a lot of the things that are going on within Calderdale. Here's just a few logos of organizations that are doing things, but particularly there's a lot of opportunities for linking a lot of these things together through stuff like the town's funds and Calderdale's 2024 vision. Also coming up in the next couple of years, or the work is going into it now, but will be coming out in 2025, is the next stage of the water industry national environment program, where Yorkshire Water are looking at opportunities that they can be investing in nature, investing in their assets in terms of the way that they're using water across the landscape, but also the way that the landscape can be improved to benefit water and habitats and environment as well. And so I think there's a lot of overlap of these things, of these different strands through Calderdale and across other local authorities as well, that I think would really benefit from thinking about things in an integrated way. And my final point is around the Calder Catchment partnership and how we're working for all of these things with these themes that you can see on the left, and the strands that I've mentioned on the right hand side. And these are all coming together in integrated catchment management that we're trying to do through the Calder Catchment partnership. And one of the things that I've requested through the natural flood management funding subgroup is about consideration of an independent, environmentally focused member to sit on the Flood Resilience and Recovery Programme Board. I'm proposing. I've requested the consideration of this, not thinking that that we as the Catchment Partnership or Calder Rivers Trust would sit in that position, but just an organisation or an individual that can look at all of these different themes and try and look at synergies between the different strands that are going on and think about flood resilience, climate emergency, biodiversity, placemaking and well-being in an integrated catchment management kind of way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much for that. I was just going to say, perhaps you could take your slides down so we can just see people for the discussion. Says you need to click to exit, or somebody needs to click to exit out of the slides. Fantastic, thank you very much. I think Tim's just slipped out of the meeting, so I'll take over chairing for now. In terms of the last point that you made, we do actually have a review of the terms of reference for the board, and I think it's at item 9, and I think we're going to be discussing that item just there. So we'll just hold that. And I'm going to bring Councillor Patient in first.
Oh, really? Thank you, Chair. I actually didn't have my hand up then, but I do have a point. I do have a point I can make. So you kind of read my mind there. Just thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Andy. Just in terms of, I guess some of the joining up work and making sure some of the placemaking aspects that you spoke about are fully integrated in the work that we're doing. I think that's kind of already happening now to a degree. But you know, it's going to get stronger. I'm sure you're kind of aware of the emerging green and healthy streets policy, which is going to kind of sit around and above the local plan, which we've had a bit of a steer on from the inspector. A lot of that is going to be instilling some of the points that you put there about around well-being, you know, encouraging active travel, modal shift, greening, and creating that kind of sense of place and stuff. I guess beyond the idea of what you've suggested and having that independent person sitting on here considering some of those points, I think actually a massive strength would be for someone, I don't know who that would be, to be almost like a statutory consultee, like looking at applications that we have coming in, be it large civil projects, be it, you know, huge capital funding to larger scale planning applications, and how they kind of fit in the wider scope of things. We do at the moment have, I think they're called Active Travel England, who are the Chris Boardman appointed new group that are sitting under the Department of Transport that are going to start weighing in on planning applications for us as a pilot area. So any other, I think, input we can have into some of those areas from you, that's even before we consider the rest of the stuff, would be really helpful. And just a point of clarification as well. This is really nitpicky. Just one thing that you said, just about the kind of access to the river in places like Mythermore and stuff, and that is totally understood. I think there's limitations around how you can manage that in places that don't already have that access. Clearly Hebton does at the Wavy Steps, but Mythermore, unfortunately, you know, through Victorian building or whatever, doesn't have that option. Thankfully we do have the Brearley Fields project, so wave a flag for that one. But sorry, yeah, throwing quite a lot at you there. Hopefully some of it can stick.
Okay, thanks for that, Scott. I'll just come in myself there, Andy, and that point that Scott picked up on about opening up views to the river. You can understand to really quite a large degree why people did turn their backs on the River Calder and its tributaries, because of the danger that represented in terms of flooding. I think what the Environment Agency have done in relation to the viewing panels in Mythermore is extremely good. I think it really does open up a view of the river. And before the Boxing Day 2015 floods, everybody kept an eye on the river, but they did it by looking down over the walls. Actually, you can see the river and you can appreciate the river with the viewing panels. So I think that has been a real improvement. I hear what you're saying about places like Hebblebrook and Halifax. I sort of wish, but it's a wish that's never going to come true. I wish the canal arm, which used to come right up into the centre of Halifax, just near the railway station there, was still there. As you know, what would we do now with that canal basin and, you know, as amenity and you know, attractive piece of water in a town centre? But that's not to be. So take your point about Hebblebrook. You can often hear it even when you can't see it when you're down at the back of Sainsbury's at Mulcher House and so on. So definitely worth thinking about how people engage with the water near them and live with water. And I think that the recent reports produced in South Yorkshire and in Humberside, connected by water and living with water, I think are good examples of that, really, in terms of understanding how we live with water. and their emphasis on whole catchment approach echoes what you've just said in your presentation. And also an emphasis which is increasing in intensity, really, is about the emphasis on biodiversity and nature and that role in relation to managing the whole catchment and living with water, and what works in terms of managing water. I think Scott's right that in some ways all of the organisations represented on this particular forum have actually taken that more integrated, more holistic catchment approach. I think we've still got a lot to do and a lot to learn. And finally, in terms of points I wanted to make, I rather like Scott's idea about the question of statutory consultation bodies. Of course, we've got the Environment Agency and sequential tests and planning, but the question of how we think, actually, and I guess it's something for the planning committee, and perhaps think about, perhaps in Calderdale, ways in which the planning committee might be made more aware of the managing water and living with water issues as the local plan goes through its processes. And we expect really to be a surge of building over the next 5 years, and then on to the 10 and 15 years. And how we manage water with our housing in Calderdale is going to be increasingly important. So I think that's an interesting idea to explore. I don't know, Andy, if you want to come back on any of those things.
No, I don't think I. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I think that one of the things both you and Scott mentioned about how we are taking more of an integrated approach to a lot of the kind of the biodiversity and the natural flood management elements of flood resilience. From my experience, it seems to be that those things are almost done retrospectively, or they're done later in the process than the civil built works are considered, for example. And I think that there's an element of bringing in those concepts earlier in that process and thinking about ways in which nature can really be used before the plaster on the wound of flood walls is applied, because essentially if the flood alleviation defence stuff it's an insurance policy if the landscape doesn't do what the landscape's meant to do in terms of holding water back. But from what I've seen of schemes that have completed, schemes that are on their way at the moment, is that kind of that natural element of things, the landscape element of things, comes after the flood alleviation scheme has been kind of outlined and commissioned.
Thank you, and it's a good point. I think historically, probably guilty as charged, really, in terms of emphasis on keeping people safe. But I think things have changed, and that journey continues. I'm going to bring in Councillor Baker, James, and then Joe.
Thanks. I mean, I know when we talk about these schemes, a lot of them are done on the economic justifications and numbers of properties done. And I think, you know, it probably is a fair criticism that the biodiversity and natural environment things have probably come a bit secondary to that and some of the considerations. I just wondered, I mean, obviously the Myveroyd scheme is kind of done now, and Scott did mention that there's all the stuff happening at Brearley Fields, which should hopefully improve the biodiversity and natural environment there. I wondered with the Hebton Bridge scheme, because obviously that hasn't yet happened, is there a chance to change any of that now in light of this, or is that all kind of done and dusted in terms of being at late design stage and what have you, or is there any scope to improve the biodiversity of it still?
Okay, thanks, James. I'm going to come back to Joe here.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Apologies, I'm also having Zoom issues, so I'm now on my phone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm not going to cut out. Just to come, I suppose, just to with regards to what Andy was saying about the schemes being designed separately from a green and grey infrastructure. I mean, I think we've got some really good examples within Calderdale where that's not happening. So, for example, in Brick House, we're doing, a big part of that scheme is environmental improvements and using natural flood management, working with nature-based solutions to reduce the flood risk in the area. It's the same with Hebblebrook and also Wallston. I appreciate frustrations from partners that perhaps in the past, certainly with Mythe and Royd, we haven't necessarily engaged earlier on. And I think just with the other councillor's question around Hebton Bridge, we're looking at various solutions to reduce the flood risk, and that does involve, working with natural based solutions as well.
Thank you. I should declare an interest to be recorded, a non-pecuniary interest in the Hebton Bridge scheme and the Errington Moor scheme, as I live at the junction of those two schemes. So if that could just be noted for the record of the meeting. Thank you. Okay. Any more points or questions? Scott, give you the final word.
No, it's okay. Sorry. I always enjoy having the final word. I just want to say, Andy, I do share your frustration on some of these things. I've not been a councillor for too long. I'm just coming to the end of my first term, in fact. And I think you're right in terms of how you're talking about how some of these schemes and thinking haven't been joined up. I feel like that's getting better. And I think, you being here as a critical friend and reminding us of things like that is really important, like part of that journey, to make sure that things are joined up. I mean, I've been like others on this call, been banging on about having more parity for natural flood management work in terms of, as opposed to civil engineering for some time. And I made that point to Rebecca Powell last year when she came up. So I do think it's important that we reinforce some of that integrated thinking and make sure it's there from the beginning. I think there's a want from the community now in a way that there wasn't before, and an understanding about biodiversity net gain, improving natural spaces and some of that. But harking back to my first point about the policy work and, I mentioned green and healthy streets. I do think that's part of how we make sure it's all integrated. So it'd be really good to kind of loop in with you, regardless of what happens in the later item, to make sure some of that thinking happens.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I'm going to draw this item to a close, and I just want to say a big thank you to Andy and indeed his colleagues out in the field for the work that you're doing and the issues that you've raised in the committee today. So thank you very much, Andy. You're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Okay, if we could just go on then to the item 6, pluvial flood events of the 16th of March 2019 and the 20th of February 2022. Now, Neil is not here. Stephen, are you going to present the report?
I'll take this, but can I just introduce you to Rachel Flood? Rachel is one of our most experienced flood engineers, and we will be doing this as a double act. I'll present the report, doing the easy bit because I can read from the script, and Rachel will then answer all the technical questions that everybody has as supplementaries. Okay, so I will take you through the report at a canter. As you say, this is about the flooding that was experienced on the 16th of March 2019 and the 20th of February 2022, both events being pluvial. Moving down to the bottom of the first section, you can see that flood investigation reports have been produced under section 19 of the Flood and Water Management Act on the 16th of March, and that's included in the pack. And we are still working on the 20th of February 22's report. In total, there were 96 reports of flood events on the first and 104 on the later one of the 20th of February. Moving down to the bottom of the page, you can see that the 16th of March, concentrated on the 16th of March now for the first part of the report. Moving down to the bottom of the page, you can see that while the rainfall on the 16th of March wasn't exceptional, It followed a long period of rain, and it was that prolonged period of rain which actually ultimately led to the flooding events. Turning the page at 2.2, we have the impacts on various areas across Calderdale. Wallston railway line was flooded. Flooding was reported on a number of sites in Todmorden. Interestingly, there was suggestions around the Lidl store that was partly to do with the Lidl drainage, but if you look into the actual Section 19 report, you will see that that isn't actually the case, and I'll return to that later. Flooding in properties at Hebton Bridge, flooding of the A646 due to surcharged outfalls, and significant peak in the river level. Temporary defences at Mythen Road FAS worked well, although reports of seepage contributed to existing flows on the highway were received. And if you remember at that point, the flood defences in Mythen Road hadn't yet been completed, so there was some leakage in those areas that hadn't been completed at that stage. Cyber Bridge in Ripponden, with a colder flood into the floodplain at Cyber Bridge Cricket Club, and a number of properties were flooded on West Street. Elland, Park Road at Elland was significantly impacted, which was somewhat unusual in our experience. This was a slightly different flood pattern to what was normal. And then finally, reports were received about surcharge outfalls in and around Rocks in Brighouse, and the rock climbing deployed their own pumps to deal with it. And indeed, in the last flood event, there was further flooding in the vicinity of Rocks again. So this is something that seems to be a constant and should be addressed by some of the work that the EA are doing in conjunction with ourselves in Brighouse. Moving down the page, you can see that at the paragraph beginning the event of the 16th of March in the middle of a busy period of Environment Agency operational activity. At the peak of this activity on the 16th of March, 27 flood warnings were issued from the Leeds area incident room, with 15 of these being in Calderdale. As the flood warnings were issued in Wallston, Todmorden and Hebton Bridge, the relevant flood warning sirens were also sounded. Due to a problem with the Wallston siren, it did not sound, while the Mythen Road siren was not sounded as the flood warning was not issued. Flood warning was not issued as the river levels were not expected to cause property flooding. And as we just said, there was the partially complete Mythen Road flood defences in the vicinity. The bottom of the page, you can see that flood wardens and volunteers responded to the event on the 16th of March from flood groups in Todmorden, Hebden Bridge, Mythen Road, Cyber Bridge and Elland, and the flood wardens liaised with the EA and CNBC, keeping people informed of the flooding that was experienced. Throughout the event, the flood wardens also did a wonderful job of operating food stores to allow the public to access equipment and stock such as sandbags and cleaning material. Bear in mind that this is the 16th of March, at which time there was still an expectation that sandbags would be available. Moving on to 2.4, you can see the issues and recommendations. But before we look at the issues and recommendations, I'd like to go back to, if I may, section 5, which is on page 32 of the section 19 report. I don't expect people to follow it, but I will just take you through the highlights of what the issues were that were experienced throughout this process. Travel through the valley was disrupted, as you might expect, and there was impact particularly in Hebton Bridge, many visitors of whom were caught out by the rapidly changing weather conditions. There were a large number of requests received by the flood wardens from residents and businesses for sandbags, and as I've just said, at that time there was that expectation that we would provide sandbags. We are tending to back out of that a little bit. Most occasions requests were received once the risk of flooding was high and following a considerable time after the flood warnings had actually been issued and the sirens sounded. Issues were reported with Wallston and Mythen Road flood warning sirens not which I think we've just mentioned. Although prior flood alerts and subsequent warnings have been issued across Calderdale, due to a problem with the Wallston siren, it didn't sound, whilst the Mythen Road siren was not sounded as the river level wasn't triggered, and we've just said that. Communication by the incident rooms at Battersea Road and Leeds with flood wardens was maintained by radio comms, and that generally worked well, but couldn't be maintained at all times because one of the radios was stuck in transmit mode. Volunteer details were not held up to date, although contact was established to aid the response. Conflicting reports were received on flooding occurring on the Halifax Road outside Lidl, and reports during the event have suggested that flooding experience was as a result of runoff from Lidl itself. However, subsequent investigations have shown that that's not the case, and I know that that's something that the Town Council are very interested in, and we will be able to report back now that the Section 19 report is complete. The incident was not escalated to Yorkshire Waters, who could have attended to manage the response. It's not clear whether contact with YWS was established in the incident room at Battersea Road, but a representative from YWS was not present during the event at Battersea Road. So basically what we're saying there is, as you might expect, there was flooding occurred on various roads, and there was flooding that occurred in various places. Issues and recommendations and lessons learned are shown at 2.4 in the report. I'm moving on to the 20th of February now at the bottom of page 16, 3.1 storm event. 104 reports, which we mentioned earlier. Again, high rainfall totals, extreme wind speeds, and also were also experienced, including increasing the likelihood of debris, which related blockages of drainage infrastructure, particularly trash screens. And indeed, that is one of the things that has been highlighted at section 3.2 in the final part. But sticking with 3.1 for the moment, given that the high rainfall total prior to the event, catchment would have a high degree of saturation and would be prone to overland flows from surface water runoff. Overland flows resulting from a high degree of saturation and steep slopes would increase the likelihood of sedimentation within watercourses and blockages of land drainage infrastructure. So again, you've got that picture of debris flying around, of silt blocking watercourses and gullies, and so you get surface water flooding as a result of that. 3.2, second paragraph. Flood incidents reported during the event were widespread and not particularly concentrated to one area, so it was across the valley as a whole, most occurring near to the valley floor where runoff from the surrounding valley sides would gravitate. And indeed, you then have a number of reasons why there was surcharging and drainage issues, build-up of litter on the entry to culverts, trash screens, build-up of silt and gravel, impedance of gully and culvert floors, poor conditions in historic land drainage infrastructure, and the submergence of outfalls. Significant issues reported were culvert soffit collapse outside 3 The Cottage, Salter Lee in Shibden, culvert and garden collapse resulting in a sinkhole outside 5 Brook Terrace Mill Lane, Luddenden. Lane slip near Ashgrove Cottage, Elland Road, Elland, and again a series of other local issues which you have in front of you, so I don't need to read. That is the report. As I say, there is a section 19 report that's appended to this, and that goes into matters in a great deal more detail. And if there are any questions, Rachel and myself will be more than happy to do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to actually, I see that Katie's got her hand up. I'm actually just going to very quickly ask some of the other agencies who are on this call just to see if they want to add anything to Stephen's initial summary and presentation of that report. Paul, can I bring you in there? And I'll come back to you, Katie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Just putting the event into context, really, I've got some stats from our hydrology team, particularly for the gauges at Hebton and Elland. At Hebton, it was the February the recent flood event. It was the 16th highest recorded in Hebton. And at Elland, it was the 6th highest recorded that we have on record. But just to put this in the wider or context in the wider Yorkshire area, we look at Tadcaster, for example. It was the 2nd highest recorded, and there was quite a lot of property flooded there. In York, it was the 5th highest ever recorded. So essentially, it might have been a bit of a near miss for the Calder Valley, this one. That's all I wanted to say. And elsewhere in Yorkshire, it was a little bit more severe.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else from the other agencies want to chip in at this point in terms of setting the context? Okay, right. Katie, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just a point about the differences between 2019 and 2022, that obviously we're seeing an increase in the surface water issues, and certainly from being on the ground, it's so sporadic and difficult for people to manage. And I've got lots of things that I need to bring up in my report that centre around the drainage and what the sort of community and the flood volunteers are saying in regards to those drains. So and what the future holds for the surface water issues, and how we alert the community to those when our alert system is based on fluvial gauges at the moment. So it's quite difficult for myself as a flood warden, and obviously got Scott on the call as well, who may go into more detail about that, but it's how those triggers are relayed and how we can manage those better in relation to surface water. And then in a bigger picture, obviously the ideal situation is that we don't have ancient drainage that we're unsure of whether is managed by Calderdale or whether it's managed by Yorkshire Water, and that pull there and how we communicate that out to people. So no questions, I suppose, just more points, and then I'll bring up some further feedback for you when I do my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Katie. Stephen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, Katie, you bring a good point up in the differences between what's managed by whom and people's understanding of what's managed by whom. In a previous life, we did we actually produced a leaflet that kind of took the form of a plan of a standard street. And we highlighted the various pipes that you would get in the street, some being the water supply, some being drainage, some being gullies, etc., etc. And we highlighted which was the responsible agency. And I wonder if that might be a useful move for Calderdale, so that people can understand better. If you perceive that as being an issue, Katie, I'd be more than happy to work with you to pull something together.
Okay, well, I suspect we may well come back to that in Katie's report as well. Thank you, Stephen. Scott?
If I may just very quickly,
Granville.
We'd be happy to support in that, of course, from Yorkshire Water. So, Stephen, if we take that one offline, maybe as to exactly what that could look like.
Thanks, Granville. Scott?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to reinforce really what Katie said, and that sounds like we're going to have a positive sort of partnership-based approach to that. I think the reality is, as we're getting more flood alleviation schemes and ramping up our NFM across the borough, is we're stopping some of that fluvial work, and we are moving into a place where we do need to focus more on the pluvial effects of how it does affect our borough and the issues with highways, projects and infrastructure, and how businesses and domestic properties are going to be dealing with that. And I do think some clarity about the under road network of oblique sort of pipes and stuff that people don't know who runs and who manages. It's great for us to know that stuff, and I think a lot of the time we do and understand these things and we can tell people. But for the people that are being affected by waves or whatever that are splashing into their properties, they don't give a damn about that. They just want to make sure it's sorted. So just thought I'd throw that out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Adrian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess it's a quick question for Stephen or Rachel as to, we had a recent discussion at the one of the RFCC subgroups about the challenges of accurately understanding what's happened in an event, and even understanding what's happened post-event. I just wondered, you reference flood incidents reported, but do you have an understanding of the properties flooded by these events and the source of that flooding?
Shall I answer that one, Stephen?
That'll be fine, Rachel. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. So it's obviously slightly different for each event, and there's different challenges with each event. I mean, generally, sort of depending on the size of event, we might have the incident rooms, which obviously provides us with a lot of information. We also carry out sort of door knocking exercises in areas where it's sort of unclear, what the source of the flooding is, helps us clarify the mechanisms and also whether it's internal or external. I think after the March 2019 event, we struggled with resources, so the door knocking exercise wasn't undertaken to sort of a full extent. But for example, the recent event, we do have a lot more information of that, and we're looking sort of any sort of incident that's been reported, even just sort of water coming off fields. So we've added that onto our investigations list so that we can get a greater understanding. Next week, we're sort of carrying out door knocking exercises as well. So that should help to sort of clarify, whether it's internal, external, highway flooding, and also the mechanisms.
Thank you, Rachel. I wonder if I could just bring up a couple of points in terms of, and thank you, I'm really pleased to see the Section 19 report finally out. I think that's extremely helpful. I think it does flag up the 2019 event and the 2022 event. It does flag up what we've all realised is that every single flood is different and that it affects our topography differently. You think that it's going to be the same houses that are flooded and it's a completely new set of houses or a completely new set of walls or landslips. I think it also flags up very, very seriously, and I think it's for this committee to take it very seriously, the difference between pluvial and fluvial flooding. And of course, the general public don't recognise those terms. Is the river overtopping? Is what people want to know. And what are the surface water problems that are coming down our very steep hills into the valleys? And I think we've been very clear in this committee about the importance, of course, of the hard flood defences, the importance of the natural flood management and nature-based solutions, the importance of property level protection and so on. We know that all of these things have to happen, that it isn't just one. But I think I really picked up on what people have already said about the knowledge that we've now gained about our culverts, our gullies, and drainage in general, and understanding really that particularly the highways through the Calder Valley, alongside the railway, the river and the canal, actually understanding what's under there and what is actually affecting or indeed limiting our knowledge of how we're going to manage the future pluvial flood events. I see that some other authorities like Kirklees have done, indeed they've applied for local levy funding, an investigation of their culverts and gullies and drains in particular places. And I wonder if perhaps the officers on this meeting should think about something geographically defined, of course, in terms of improving our understanding and proper investigation, because I think it's clear that we're going to need that in the future. And I think we've got responsibility in terms of communications. Katie's absolutely right in terms of making sure that the public don't necessarily just look at the river and the river gauges or the rivers, but actually understand that flooding can come from different sources than the canal or the river overtopping. Actually, we need to think about refining our communications and our work with the community in relation to those things. I have to say that this question of sandbags is a hardy perennial, isn't it? It's a real issue, and we need to get better in terms of communicating the council role, the individual role, the resident role, and the flood wardens role in relation to that. I had occasion to break out my new flood sacks in this year, 2022. But I wanted to particularly thank those who were involved, and the report concentrates very much on the facts of what happened. I don't think it necessarily is the place where we basically indicate how fantastically grateful we are to the flood wardens, to property owners, to people who really pulled out the stops in these two events, and how wearing it is for people who live in the valleys and halfway up the valleys who do get flooded, how much it does affect them. I think it was very noticeable, and it's something perhaps we'll touch on at a future meeting in terms of where flood defences have been completed, actually how that has a psychological effect in terms of making people feel safer and have more confidence in their communities. I'll stop there. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on the Section 19 report.
Could I just chip in just regarding your comment about sort of assets, culverts, etc., that we sort of have little information about, just to make you aware, we're sort of putting together an asset management plan at the moment. So that will hopefully better inform us as to the sort of condition and position and dimensions, etc., of current assets that we have around Calderdale. Thank you.
I think that's extremely useful. Thank you. Okay, all right. I can't see anybody else indicating, so I'm going to hand back to Tim for item 7, the flood risk reduction and investment group. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Jane. So flood risk and investment group, and I think this is colleagues from the Environment Agency presenting.
That's right, Chair. Yes, thanks. Paul Swales, Environment Agency. I'm the Senior Flood Risk Advisor for some of you who may not know me. I'm going to canter through the report like Stephen did previously. Quite a lot to go through, though. There's quite a lot happening, so I will be as swift as possible. So I'm going to start with Mythenroyd because I'm biased and I always choose this one first. I'm really proud to announce recently that it won the top award at the ICE Yorkshire and Humber Awards. It was a top prize for projects over £5 million across the region, and particularly recognised for its commitment to health and safety, working in a constrained environment, and the community engagement that we've done throughout the project. Just going back to sort of the presentation around what that Andy mentioned, this Mythenroyd really was the exception to the rule, I think, of how we do projects, because this was really, the scene was set by central government immediately after the Boxing Day event, and this was a project that had to be delivered at pace. So yeah, environmental side of things may have taken a slightly back seat, but I guess when hundreds of properties have flooded significantly, I think they would rather have hard walls and what have you, trying to protect them. And I think we have changed the place of Mythenroyd. I think it does have a different feel with the glass panels, the hard and soft landscaping, and I think it'll look even better as spring comes and the summer comes. Heavily constrained environment. The scheme is essentially complete. I keep saying that every time we have these partnership boards, but the final property flood resilient measures are in place now in the scheme. So the flood doors and flood windows, there was only a couple that were outstanding. They have been done now. Also, the glass panel that was damaged downstream of New Road Bridge has been replaced. And I drove through yesterday on my way to Hebton, and the steel plate has been fitted to the New Road footbridge or footpath. Footbridge attached to the bridge. So yeah, so that semi-permanent solution there is in place for until the new footbridge gets put in by Calderdale Council. Moving on, we're still working on the Burnley Road Academy property flood resilience project. We've now got confirmation of all the funding from Department for Education to undertake this work, which is fantastic news. We're still hopeful of delivering this work during the summer holiday, so there's minimal disruption to the school. We're just going through a bit of a tender process at the moment with regards to this project. Moving on, Hebton Bridge, we've now completed the detailed design for zones A and B. So zones A and B are sort of the River Calder works and around the confluence with Hebton Water. So we're now really in a strong position to develop the detailed scheme cost for these areas, working with BAM, our delivery partner, and our DEFRA commercial internal services. The surface water design, the catchment model has now been completed, and that's helping to refine the design of the surface water elements of the scheme. So this is a very, very complex project, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, trying to reduce flood risk from those sources. We're looking at submitting the planning application for the project, which covers most of the work, and that's going to be submitted later this year. And before that, we'll hold a public information event to share the proposals with the community and get their thoughts on them. And we're also looking to establish, I think it's really important, lesson learned from the Mythenroyd project, that having sort of an engagement hub in the town for Hebton Bridge is really important for the local community. So I think that a permanent hub is being looked at, but in the interim, we're going to look at utilising the Hebton Bridge Town Hall for 1 or 2 days a week, so that the community can come and get updates on the project and speak to staff. If you've been in and around Hebton recently, you'll notice that the Adult Learning Centre wall works have recommenced. I was there yesterday, and they're well underway. Hopefully expected to be complete in the next couple of months, so in June. Moving on, Erringdon Hillside, the detailed design for this is broadly complete. There's a few minor tweaks and changes that are being reviewed following some feedback from the community and our partners. The development of the full business case for this project is ongoing, and looking at submitting planning this summer, with construction work starting later this year as well. You'll notice when I go through the rest of the project, potentially there's a lot of construction work happening in 2022, which is great news. Stubbing Home Road, this is a project I'm closely involved with. The Arab's detailed design is continuing. We're doing a bit of a review of some of the modelling, particularly the upstream end of the project around the turning circle and the proposed options there. And to inform some of that little bit of work, we've just issued some notice of entries to do some structural and threshold survey work around, particularly around sort of Mytho Meadows, those properties there, really just to ensure that, or to confirm that these properties aren't impacted by the scheme. I think we know they're not, but we just want to make sure that they're not. And we're still undertaking sort of individual engagement with residents that are directly affected by the works. And we will, once we have greater certainty on the project, which I'm hopeful it will be in the not too distant future, we'll hold a sort of a more formal public engagement event, as I mentioned, with regards to the Hebton Bridge one. And it may be that we even join them up together, not sure yet. Reservoir storage, the next one down the list. Mott MacDonald, our consultant, still continuing the economic appraisal. The routing model's now complete, and some of the more detailed hydraulic modelling for Hebton and Mythenroyd in particular, to identify the benefits of the reservoir storage works. That's nearing completion, hopefully by the end of this month, I believe. However, delays have been experienced with this due to that modelling expertise of utilising the sort of the reservoir element being transferred to the Hebton Bridge scheme. But it does show that initial results show that the reservoir storage would benefit Hebton and Mythenroyd properties, which is, I would argue, fairly obvious. but they're the ones that are going to benefit most, shall we say, rather than even further downstream. Park Road, Elland. This is the next project. So I think this is one that Joe is leading on, but we're looking at producing sort of the first stage of a business case starting in April, so this month, and we're continuing to sort of gather data and share data with regards to this, because I know this is quite a politically sensitive one, isn't it? It gets mentioned a lot at various boards and meetings. So this is one that we're still keen to progress and move forward, and which we are doing. Copley, we've now got sort of further funding assured and signed off, so we can develop the outline business case further. Ground investigations are actually due to start next week. And we've held some really positive had some positive meetings with the Copley Cricket Club. So they've allowed us to use their facilities for sort of the compound setup or welfare units, and we're also going to utilise the pavilion to be there when the ground investigation starts, for the community to come and talk to us about the project and what's going on. And we are also liaising with Network Rail, because we need to undertake some ground investigation on their railway embankment, because previous floods have shown that it leaks. So we need to do work there. So all the GI will be taking place, or hopefully starting next week, and that's particularly around sort of the existing embankment around the village. One of our smaller schemes, Shorewood Road, this is very advanced. In fact, that we're hopefully be in construction this summer to undertake this work. I fully expect it to be quite a short construction period. We're just having to go out to tender for a preferred bidder for this one, just due to the cost have increased slightly, but not to the detriment of the project. It just means we have to go out to tender rather than direct award. Hebble Brook, this is a really, really key one for me now, particularly with all the talk earlier around sort of environmental benefits, enhancements, biodiversity net gain. So we have assurance for the outline business case now, so we're sort of well underway with a detailed design. And this project is not only around reducing flood risk, but there's quite a lot of environmental enhancement. So we're creating a wetland area, bit of an informal footpath around the area as well, lots of tree planting. And only yesterday, I found out that Calderdale Council identified a really good area for additional tree planting only a couple of miles away in Mixenden. So that's fantastic news, and it could be one that we can even utilise for other projects as well if the area is that big. And it also means that we have a really good chance of exceeding our biodiversity net gain target of 20% for this project, particularly as a result of the long-term maintenance agreement that hopefully we'll have with the council on this. Other bits, pieces. So we've also undertaken tree felling in this area to facilitate the construction, which again is hopefully going to start in summer this year, if not before, in fact, because we're able to do the in-channel work. So we're having to slightly move the channel and make it more natural, and we can do this under our permitted, or the Environment Agency's permitted development rights. So we're looking to start these works, permits. We still need a permit to do the works, but hopefully in May or June, late springtime. And then after that, we'll be in a position to undertake the environmental side away from Hebblebrook Watercourse. So yeah, really excited about that one, particularly around the environmental benefits. Excuse me. Next is Wallston. Again, this has got the real potential of a lot of environmental benefits. It looks like we're looking at a bit of a suite of options for this. So not just sort of hard engineering solutions, but the softer engineering side. We have a strategic outline case which has been approved. So we now have the funding to scope out the outline business case. We've got a really ambitious programme with this one, because our Network Rail have a significant funding pot, shall we say, that they want to utilise to better protect their rail network, because that floods a lot, as we all know. They have timescale restrictions on their funding, so we're trying to really push this one forward and work closely with them to develop the suite of options. And as I said, natural flood management is likely to be, or will be, one of those solutions. Shorewood Bridge, another one where we have a strategic outline case approved, and now we're just working with our consultant Arup to get him to contract to develop the outline business case. But I think that the next steps for this one is going to be undertaking modelling, because our modelling in between sort of the River Calder confluence with the Ryburn and the reservoirs is very limited. So we need to plug that gap and understand the baseline here in more detail. Brighouse Fass, this is one that Joe is heavily involved with, but I will canter through this one. And I know Joe's very excited because there are cabins now on site, and the compound is set up in Brighouse Rugby Club, I believe, and that's going to support the works through to our construction phase, which is due to commence again this summer for around 12 months. But the final design scope has been agreed, and to deliver the full business case. Some early works have commenced, so the ground investigation in the parks. And you'll also see in the some lovely landscape design drawings or drawings showing what the Wellhome Park and Winnie Hill Park hopefully will look like in the future as a result of the works, which is fantastic. And the team did hold a public consultation event recently, which over 40 people attended, which I think is brilliant for Brighouse, because I've been in events in the past in Brighouse and there's only been a handful. So yeah, credit to the team for that one. And the final couple, some smaller projects, again, Back Waterloo, which is in Todmorden, developing the strategic outline case for this one. This is more around remediation of the existing rock armour and riprap and scour protection. This is a bit of a long-standing issue which needs a more robust and long-term solution. So that's one that we're looking at. And then finally, Callus Bridge. This is one I've reinvigorated because it needs to be. It's the one that floods first usually, or the road certainly does in the Calder Valley at the minute. Long-term ambition, but looking at reducing the risk from all sources of flooding, and there's some key partners involved in this, because I think every agency or organisation has a vested interest in this one. So a lot of data gathering at the minute and trying to find where we have gaps, so we work with that. And then finally, in the heat of last week, the floodmobile was up in the Calder Valley, and I'm going to blame the heat for lack of attendance. What we did have was some good conversations and some really positive conversations from between our experts, so Flood Mary and Fowler, who some of you will know very well, and some residents, I think, gained some real insight and knowledge from those two, and we're looking to utilise property flood resilience measures in the future. And we also utilised the time for Brighouse to promote the scheme as well. But I think it probably would have been better attended if it was a rainy day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. That was very comprehensive. And can I see any questions? Yes, Jane.
Thank you. That was a romp through, but very comprehensive. Thank you very much, Paul. Just wanted to say something, first of all, about Park Road. And yes, it's sensitive, but I think it's sensitive for a number of reasons. Of course, there was the previous landslip on that road, no doubt created by the weather conditions, and a long time in terms of getting the funding to repair that. So one of the things that we realised as a result of that is the economic importance of that road. really, as an absolutely key road between Elland and Brickhouse, and the economic impact of the detours that had to be made during the period of the closure. And so its importance is well above the particular residential households and businesses that are just there. And certainly it was quite a sight this time. And once again, there was a further impact on the size of the road. So it's something we do keep a very close eye on. And you're absolutely right that it's sensitive, but it's important to us in terms of economic activity, as well as just the sheer inconvenience to residents around there, for whom it's an absolutely key arterial road. I want you to just check the point that you made as well about ground investigations in Copley, and to check that the ward councillors were aware, as well as the residents, that there was going to be the ground investigations there, because people always worry if they see people in yellow and orange jackets holding instruments. People are always concerned, and they don't always immediately talk to the people in the field. They come to their councillors and start imagining that terrible things are happening. So just wanted to check the ground investigations. And then a couple of other things. One was Callus, and I think it's absolutely right that Callus Mark II, as it were, in terms of Callus Bridge, that we look again at that. It is absolutely, in terms of flooding, pluvial or fluvial in Calderdale, in the upper Calder Valley, Callus Bridge is the canary in the mine, really. We have to somehow address those issues. And if the A646 is going to be closed anywhere, it's going to be closed at Callus Bridge, and we need to get to grips with that. And final thing to say, Chair, is that I did indeed go to the Floodmobile and met Mary and Fola. Photograph of me on Twitter, which shows me alongside Fola. He clearly was very, very near the camera, and I was very far away. He's a very tall chap. It was very useful and practical in terms of some of the things that we should think about, encouraging residents in terms of what works and what doesn't work in terms of property level resilience. And I wonder, perhaps we should think about, in this next phase, as we go forward and thinking about planning how we manage water and live with water in the future, whether some of the things that were being promoted in the Floodmobile should be part of our promotion to residents, in terms of where there is evidence of what really works at property level, making properties flood resilient. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Jane. Paul, is there any of that you want to?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. So in terms of the ground investigation for Copley, the ward councillors are aware. I can't remember the chap's name, although he did, because he came on our walkabout with the cricket club, and he did attend the Floodmobile in Brighouse, but he is aware. And I'm going to say Colin, but I could be wrong. But I've got a nod of a head. So, but definitely aware, and we'll be sending out some the project team will be sending out some comms as well, particularly by our I want to say single point of contact, Sarah, who I think it's Sarah. Terrible with names, but yeah, she's a really good point of contact to let the community know as well. So, and on Callus, I'm just really passionate about pushing this project again. There'll clearly be limitations or constraints, because the previous scheme there, which was way before even partnership funding came into fruition, it struggled to attract the funding then because of the lack of benefit. But with the way partnership funding works now, I think there is probably a better opportunity, and it's one that we will look to try and put some sort of solution in place. Certainly not guaranteeing that there will be one, but it's one that we're going to look at. And then, just on the Floodmobile, there still is the opportunity to get it back if we so wish. On a call yesterday, and it costs around £2,500 per day, and that's with sort of Mary coming along and Fola, the transport costs and what have you. So yeah, I know you can't predict the weather and what have you, but I guess ideally it might be better when the weather's not so good, or not immediately after a flood event, but soon after might be a better time. But yeah, just it's there, it's available, and I know the Oxcam Pathfinder project, they're very keen to get it out and about elsewhere in the country, so there'll be no problem in having it up in the Calder Valley again. Just takes a bit of organising, and yeah, whether some funding could be found from somewhere to bring it back, I'm sure it could be in the future, because it's well worth it, and it's a fantastic glorified caravan, I'll call it, but it's got some really, really good products in there, and simple things that can cost as little as £20-25 for a homeowner could save them a lot of future distress.
Thanks, Paul. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the flood mobile, which I visited, and I pick up on Paul's point about the range of kit that was in there that showed you stuff from, you know, a really small amount to a really high amount. I thought it was great. And Mary is extremely knowledgeable and well liked. And it was a shame that it was poorly attended. It could have been weather, it could have been placement. When I shared it through the Facebook group, immediately people from Sorby Bridge asked why it wasn't coming to Sorby Bridge, because, you know, and then outlined issues that they'd been having that are becoming more apparent as in each flood event that we experienced, that Sorby Bridge is suffering a little bit. So it was great to hear that there's the opportunity for it to come back, and also wondering whether, you know, because of COVID, we haven't done a big flood warden event, public event, which we have been doing prior to COVID, where we bring the community together, but also opportunity for all the wardens to get together, and whether it's something that we could bring to that, maybe we join it up and we have that, because we, at the last engagement event that we had with flood wardens, we did have people come from various places, like flood sacks, but also flood is a big conversation as well. I spoke with members of the EA last week at top of the flood mobile about flood and the insurance and how it needs to be widely advertised. So it could be something that we link in with that as well, because we had representatives from flood a few years ago before COVID, and a lot of people didn't know that they could access this insurance and hadn't looked because they assumed they couldn't get insurance. So yeah, there's definitely some opportunities there I'd like to talk to you about, Paul, and see if we can get some sort of event, and whether funding through the Community Resilience Group could be accessed for that. Definitely a conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Paul?
Yeah, I just want to come back on the Sorby Bridge. Well, a couple of the points. So yeah, definite lesson, because this is the first time we've done it, definite lesson learned around linking it into a wider event, whether that was, someone mentioned the Yorkshire show, for example, but yeah, or some other Peace Hall event, because that was originally where I wanted to put or one of the locations was the Peace Hall in Halifax, actually, because I would have thought it might get better footfall, but it was unavailable, sadly. But yeah, linking it into a wider event, whether, yeah, flood warden event, that would be fantastic. Just going back to Sorby Bridge, I was quite ambitious in my original ideas for the Floodmobile visit. I wanted it to be in 4 locations over 2 days, and Sorby Bridge was one of those, because I wanted it basically up and down the valley. However, I quickly got told that logistically it just wouldn't be possible to have it in 4 separate looks. So the idea was for it to be Brighouse and Sorby Bridge on the Thursday, and then Hebton and Todmorden on the Friday. But just logistically of setting it up, demobilising it, and then travel to the next place, it just wasn't feasible, sadly. But certainly if Sorby Bridge, because we had the venue set up as well, it was going to be in the Tesco's car park of Sorby. But if it's somewhere that's keen, definitely there's no reason why we can't do that next time.
Okay, thank you. thanks very much then. So we're happy to receive that report, and I will move us on then to item 8, which is the highlight reports. First, which is the community report. And Katie, you've circulated a written report, but is there anything particularly you want to highlight?
Yes, please. So obviously most of it is as read, and it's progressing really well. But I just wanted to make some really important points around the 20th of February event that we had this year that have come out from some of the flood warden groups, and it's key points that I said that I would voice today on behalf of those groups. So as we mentioned before during this meeting, that drains are a common issue and they're causing severe road issues at times. Gullies are compacted, and some flood warden groups are doing a pretty good job of reporting those drains in bulk and having them cleaned. But obviously it's an ongoing battle. They're cleaned, we get a downfall, we're getting a lot of stuff coming down from the uplands at the moment, huge amounts that are just compacting the drains at the moment. So we had a report back in from Todmorden, a phone call actually, to say that the Todmorden group had been quite robustly reporting drains, and their group of flood wardens felt that they had less severe effects of surface water flooding in key areas that would have normally flooded. And they wanted it to be voiced that they felt it was directly in relation to them reporting the drains and then being cleared quite quickly. But then we've got other areas where we asked the drains to be cleared and were told that it was not possible because it wasn't worth it, because the outflow into the river was higher than the road. But the river level was higher than the level of the drains, which wasn't entirely true. I think it was just completely and utterly compacted. Communication was difficult at times between control and flood wardens. I experienced this personally, and I've asked that we can have some further training and some better communication with the guys at control, just to understand our responsibility and their responsibility, because from a flood warden perspective, we were under the understanding that when we called into control, it was because that was then connected to all the other services that we may require rather than us calling them ourselves. So on that 20th of February, I ended up having to phone the police with a serious issue at Ludden Foot because members of the public were in the road and managing traffic themselves and wondering why flood wardens were not doing this. So, and normally on something that, a road that's impassable at times, we have some sort of statutory body there to manage people and road users and cars, and just it was extremely chaotic, and felt that I was completely on my own at times. And to add to that, which was quite annoying, I'll be bold and say it, a Calderdale van came through that road and gave a high-vis jacket to a member of the public, who put the jacket on and was then looked to be an official person managing the traffic. And also that could have been a flood warden, perceived to be a flood warden by members of the public, even though I, myself and two other wardens, we were not in the road explicitly on my recommendation that we do not go in the road because we're not insured. But we're wearing high vis, the lady was wearing high vis, it looked like she was part of our team, and I just felt it sort of gave justification to the lady that she should have been in the road, and having a high vis given to her, I felt it was inappropriate, and it sent completely the wrong message. We should have had somebody there to manage. That is the main thoroughfare at the Ludden Foot junction there with Ludden Lane. We had some members of the public being rather stupid in cars and wetting us, and obviously very upset that they were having to be slowed down because basically the bow waves would have affected the properties either side. So we were having to protect those properties. Obviously, cars are still coming through because the road is still open, and it just felt like there was a little bit of an out of control situation there, which was a worry for myself and the other flood wardens. Obviously not taking away from the fact that the community were amazing, and they did listen to us on most occasions about drains and things, and they were extremely helpful to us because there weren't that many of us down at that point there at times. So not taking away from that, but just to mention that it could have been a very serious road incident with somebody getting run over or cars crashing or whatever. We all know what happens when people are under stress. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of high level of erosion on the hillsides. This came in mainly from the Hebton Bridge group, that they were getting huge pieces of stuff coming down the roads, which were going into the drains. They were using flood blocks to divert a lot of it. But obviously, there's a lot of scour going on up there, as we've probably most of us seen if we've been out walking on the hills. The other thing to mention, which is a point again for the Environment Agency, which I've brought up a couple of times, well, probably more than a couple of times, that was being kind. The flood forecasting from the EA caused a considerable amount of anxiety, particularly in Mythen Road with the forecasting on that gauge there, because even though we've got the defences there, we're feeling safe. It's when you see a level that is predicted higher than Boxing Day, you're not going to pay attention to anything else. That is all you're going to see. And it just was a straight line, as Jane just showed on the video. It's scary for people. And if you only look at that once and then go off and do whatever you're doing to protect your property, I think it's not very helpful. And we've talked about this before, how that can be made more effective for the community in alleviating a bit of anxiety, but also being a bit more realistic about what's happening on the ground for those people. So that's my piece said on the drains, and I hope that we can have less events in the future, but just so that you're aware that is the information that's coming back from community and flood warden groups. Sorry, that's my phone ringing. So that's about it. Everything else is as read. Obviously, we've had good progress with health, public health at the moment, and we're continuing those conversations on a really regular basis. And once we start reporting again, we should get more information through for that. And I will stop talking now because you've probably heard enough, but thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Jane?
I just wanted to pick up two things from Katie's report. The first really is the point about driving through roads while there's an incident going on. And I experienced myself, being up to my shoulders in a drain, and people driving past and absolutely driving dangerously past at speeds that were just not appropriate for the circumstances, and ignoring the fact that there were people in high vis out there, and first of all, I thought some of these people are passing through, but actually they're on the side roads. They are also local people. So I wonder if there is a way in which we could think about communications during a flooding incident, because these are our residents, our people who are in the safety of their cars thinking they have the right to behave in that way. And the question of driver behaviour during a flooding incident and public safety is something that we need to perhaps think about our communications on. The second point is one that Katie made well, and that's to do with the question of the forecasting, particularly the river level forecasts, and you look at those, and they were going above Boxing Day 2015. And before you start the process of lugging your ground floor upstairs for storage, for me, I now try and triangulate. You know, you look outside, you see what the flood wardens are saying, you check Eye on Calderdale, and you take all of those things into account, all of those sources of information before you panic. And in fact, the level which was above Boxing Day 2015, actually I looked at it half an hour later and it was already down to more manageable levels. And I really do appreciate the work that goes into the weather forecasting, and it's better to be warned than not. And I'm sure Environment Agency and colleagues feel they can't win, but I don't actually know what we can do really, because it is panicky when you see the river levels quite so high in the forecast. So I just want to intensify what Katie said. We need to somehow try and manage public fear, public expectation, and public reassurance around these events, and how we might get better at it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jane. And the point, Katie, also about the Calderdale van and the yellow jacket. I noticed Stephen nodding about that, so perhaps you have a conversation outside the meeting about that. Jo?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I was just going to come in that point around the forecasts. What we publish on gov.uk is the live data, and it's the data that gets into our incident room. It's the best information we have at that time, and there is, like Councillor Scullin said, a real balance between getting the information out there and not scaring people. I mean, Councillor Patient rang me on Saturday morning to see whether I thought it was right or not, or whether there was a glitch. And that's exactly what the duty officers see as well, which is why it's so important, the communication between the incident room and the wardens. So again, another thanks from me for the support. And interestingly, myself and Lauren had a meeting with our flood resilience colleagues yesterday, and after every single flood incident, they review the flood warning triggers and also the sort of data that gets looked at. So there will be that sort of process going through as well. And again, I know sort of through the community resilience group, we do take on a lot of feedback, and through Katie on what we should be putting out there as well. So it's not easy, unfortunately, but it is being sort of looked at regularly.
Thanks very much, Jo. Adrian, want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. And it is just to come on the back of that. I think this isn't the first time we've seen the live river levels cause alarm in colder communities or other communities. But I guess particularly the sensitivity of the forecasts and the reactive nature of the river in Calderdale means that it has I think a greater impact. And looping back, I guess, to the well-being and kind of psychological impact of flood, which we know is an anxiety which is very high in the Calder Valley. Again, I think clearly the impact of that is amplified. I know based on previous feedback, we have gone back to our national colleagues, because this is a trial. These live river levels, or the live river level forecasts, should I say, that you can see on a number of our stations in the Calder Valley are not available everywhere, but they're part of a trial. So we have fed back before, and I just wonder, given this isn't the first time it's come up, whether we go away and try and I guess pull together a bit of a briefing note on what feeds into those live forecasts that people can see on the website, because there are differences. Yes, that does feed into our incident room, Joe's right, but there are other models that the incident room use, and then there is, of course, the local professional judgment that gets applied as well. So it is a difficult balancing act. I think the feedback we've had before actually is overall it is helpful to see the live river levels and forecasts, but what we all want to do is to avoid those those unhelpful spikes which cause that undue concern. So I think if you're happy for me to take that action, we'll go away and see what we can provide back and what is being done to further refine those live trials.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. I'll bring Scott in, and then I think we should move on. Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly, really, and just on Katie's point around feeling a little bit abandoned where they were and some of the services not being quite joined up. I guess this goes back to the point that now we're in a place where pluvial flooding is going to be something that we might need to focus on a little bit more further. And clearly we know where some of those hot spots are about where it gets onto the road. You know, Callus has been mentioned, Ludden and Foot, and places like that. I wonder, just for future reference, so that we don't repeat incidents like this, whether it's Blue Light Partners or whether it's our own, you know, community response people could do natural sweeps on those spaces. They are likely to have voluntary sector people there anyway, including the flood wardens, so they wouldn't be alone. But I think in terms of helping triage some of that work out, doing some sort of rag rating zonal sort of work on those places would be really helpful going forward.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, I'll move on to the next update report, which is natural flood management, and Granville.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll keep this brief. I'm just mindful of time. I think so. Really, you know, take the report as submitted, as read. Just sort of pick out, I guess, a couple of the highlights. Obviously, we had the Partnership Board agreeing to provide some further funding to the NFM programme quite recently at Christmas time. So we're now working through kind of what the programme for spending that money looks like and how we shape the right balance between delivery of NFM on the ground and the other activity that we need to support NFM around priority areas, modelling, ecological surveys, those kind of things. Whilst also taking on board the comments that the board made last time. I think it was particularly Councillor Scullion around seeking further opportunities to unlock other partnership funding that we can help to kind of offset some of the expenditure that the board has committed. We've funded some further landowner schemes and priority actions, and we are just currently working through what the next round of landowner grants fund, how that process is going to work when we want to open that up for applications. We've got quite a lot of landowners sort of already pre-registered, if you like, in terms of potential interest. The Environment Agency through Atkins have been leading on some modelling for priority areas for NFM that I think is due for delivery. I don't know whether Joe can update. I think it was due for delivery by the end of March, which was yesterday, but is imminent is probably best to say. And then I think the final one, just to kind of pick out as a highlight, is some really exciting discussions that Ben Fenton, the NFM officer, has been opening up with an artist called Andy Goldsworthy about looking for sites within the valley where we can do some awareness raising around NFM through sort of an NFM as art or art as NFM programme. And we've got sort of 6 proposals for that at the moment that we're reviewing and potentially then going to be seeking funding to implement some of those. So that's probably me in terms of the things to pick out. Obviously happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Granville. That's good. Any questions for Granville? Okay, in that case, can I go to Lucy and the comms report?
Thank you. Again, I'll be very quick. Janine and Lauren have put together a very detailed report about the communications that's been taking place, and also looking forward to the next few months. But I can't let this opportunity go by without saying a big thank you to our partners for the launch of Iron Calderdale. Hopefully you've seen the refreshed website. It's taken an awful lot of work and commitment, particularly from Janine and Lauren, but I know partners have been involved as well. We know that this is a very useful tool for signposting too during flooding incidents, and it's very well used, and we've got the statistics to back that up. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to improve the site. We've got new functionality. We also got some additional confidence about it operating out of hours too, which previously was a bit of a concern. We will continue to review the content as and when required, and again we'll evaluate as we go through as well. But that was the main thing that I wanted to highlight here. Hopefully you've all had a chance to have a look at the website. It's been quite a journey, but I'm very pleased with it. And we're highlighting it getting in touch with all our stakeholders just to make sure everyone's aware of it. There's a tremendous promotion campaign so that everyone's used to seeing it again. So thank you for your help with that.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Yes, it's been a good launch. Well done. So well done to everyone involved. Okay, nobody else on that one. So Stephen, the Resilient Infrastructure Report, I think you said some of this has been covered, but if there's anything you want to pick up.
No, I don't think there is. You've got the detail in section 3 of item 6, which are the detail of the 20th of February 22 flood events. And that gives you reasons why the flood took place, and it also gives you the effects of the flood. So no, there's nothing I'd like to add, Chair.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Okay, so we'll take us on then to the review of the terms of reference. I think I missed some discussion about this earlier. Stephen, are you covering this in Neil's absence?
Yeah, I can cover this in Neil's absence. You've got the covering report at item 9, and just going straight into the meat of it. So effectively, we should carry this out on an annual basis, but we haven't actually done it since February the 17th. Not quite sure why, but we will ensure that the annual review takes place. Moving on to section 3, you can see at 3.1 that we've been asked to consider appointing an independent catchment partnership member. 3.3 talks about the existing community interaction with the report, and in particular highlights the fact that even if we do put the independent catchment partnership manager in, we would still maintain the 2 chairs of the operational groups as being board members. 3.5, members of the board would also need to consider whether the independent member position is an eligible voting member or an advisory member, and that is basically it. So there's 2 recommendations. One is, do we approve the update to the terms of reference? And the second is, members are asked to decide whether they support the principle of an independent catchment manager. Just for further information on item 4.1, the 2 updates have been, the terms of reference has been changed to April the 22nd, and the final bullet point on page 71 has replaced the E&E Directorate with Regeneration and Strategy. So they are very minor changes indeed.
Thank you, Stephen. Jane?
Chair and board, I'm very happy to support the principle, but clearly there's a number of things in there just to consider, and to ask officers to bring forward a report for the next meeting on that item.
Thanks. Yeah, particularly on how we add the independent member. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on that? Are we happy with that as a way forward? That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. And item 10. Yorkshire Region Flood and Coastal Committee update. Jane, I think that might be you again.
Thank you. That is me. I've actually got nothing significant to update. I mean, I could talk to you for ages about the Humber flood barriers and Robin Hood's Bay and things like that. But there's nothing specific to Calderdale that we haven't already covered in this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I have any public question time. Any questions on the Yorkshire Road or anything else that's not being covered? That's brilliant. In that case, so thank you very much, everybody, for your